Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Alabama. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing where and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The estate stood alone amidst the sweltering heat of Alabama's summer of 1846. Its white columns rising like pale ghosts against the backdrop of sprawling cotton fields. Evelyn Beaumont, 23 years of age, had returned to Beaumont Manor after completing her education at a prestigious women's college in Boston. The carriage wheels crunched on the gravel driveway as she arrived home for the first time in 4 years. The grand plantation house seemed unchanged, but something in the air felt different, heavier, as if the humidity carried whispers that couldn't quite form into words. The servants lined up to greet her, their eyes downcast as protocol demanded. All except one, an elderly black woman standing at the far end of the line, whose gaze remained fixed on Evelyn with an intensity that caused the young woman to pause. There was something familiar about her weathered face, but Evelyn couldn't place it. The woman appeared to be in her 70s, her hands gnarled from decades of labor, her back slightly bent. When their eyes met, the old woman did not lower her gaze, as the others had. Instead, she held Evelyn's stare with an unsettling steadiness. "Who is that woman?" Evelyn asked her father, Judge Thaddeus Beaumont, as they entered the grand foyer of the manor. "That's just old Nora Fields," he replied dismissively. "Been with the family for longer than you've been alive. Don't pay her any mind." There was something peculiar in her father's tone, a tension that hadn't been there before. But Evelyn, eager to settle back into the comforts of home, didn't pursue the matter further. The homecoming dinner that evening was lavish, prepared under the supervision of the household's head cook. Throughout the meal, Evelyn regaled her parents with stories of Boston society and her educational accomplishments. She had returned not just educated, but polished, sophisticated, different from the wide-eyed girl who had left Alabama 4 years prior. "I've arranged for you to be properly introduced to society here," her mother, Victoria Beaumont, announced over dessert. "The Hendersons are hosting a ball next week. All the finest families of the county will attend, including the Montgomerys," Evelyn asked, a hint of interest in her voice. Her father and mother exchanged a glance. "Yes," her father finally said, "young William Montgomery has returned from his European tour. I believe his father has hopes of securing his future soon." The implication was clear. At 23, Evelyn was at the perfect age for marriage, and the Montgomerys were one of the wealthiest families in the state. Such a union would solidify both families' standing in Alabama society. Later that night, as Evelyn prepared for bed in her childhood bedroom, she heard a soft shuffling outside her door. Opening it, she found Nora Fields standing in the dimly lit hallway, seemingly doing nothing but staring at her door. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn demanded, startled by the old woman's presence. Nora's voice was low, raspy with age, but clear in its intent. "Just checking to see if you need anything, Miss Evelyn." "My personal maid has already attended to me," Evelyn replied coldly. "And in this household, servants don't wander the family quarters without purpose." The old woman's expression remained unchanged, but something flickered in her eyes. "Of course, Miss Evelyn, I forget my place sometimes." She didn't move immediately, instead letting her gaze linger on Evelyn's face. "You've grown to look just like your mother." The comment, seemingly innocent, sent an inexplicable chill down Evelyn's spine. "That will be all," she said firmly, closing the door without waiting for a response. Sleep came uneasily that night. Evelyn dreamed of being an infant, cradled in unfamiliar arms, looking up at a face that was both strange and known. She woke before dawn, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool night air flowing through her open windows. The dream left her with a sense of disquiet she couldn't shake. The following days settled into a rhythm as Evelyn reacquainted herself with plantation life. Her father spent his days attending to legal matters in town, while her mother orchestrated the social calendar and supervised the household. Evelyn found herself with ample free time, which she filled with reading in the library, practicing piano in the music room, and occasionally venturing out for supervised rides across the expansive Beaumont property. It was during one such ride, nearly a week after her return, that Evelyn encountered Nora Fields again. The old woman was walking slowly along the edge of a cotton field, carrying what appeared to be herbs in a small basket. Curious and somewhat irritated by the woman's continued presence in her thoughts, Evelyn directed her horse toward her. "You're far from the house," Evelyn called down from her mount. "What business brings you to the fields at this hour?" Nora looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun with one hand. "Gathering herbs for medicines, Miss Evelyn. The overseer knows I'm here." "Medicines?" Evelyn asked skeptically. "We have a physician in town for that." A thin smile crossed Nora's face. "Some ailments require remedies the doctor doesn't provide. Knowledge passed down through generations." "Folk superstitions, you mean?" Evelyn scoffed, the education of Boston making her dismissive of such practices. "You'd be better served following modern medical advice than clinging to primitive beliefs." If the insult landed, Nora showed no sign of it. "These remedies nursed you through more than one fever as a child, Miss Evelyn." "Your mother trusted them then." The statement caught Evelyn off guard. "You never tended to me as a child. My nurse was a woman named Sarah." "Sarah came later," Nora replied, her gaze unwavering. "When you were 4. Before that, there was me." Before Evelyn could respond, her riding companion, the daughter of a neighboring plantation owner, called to her from several yards away. By the time Evelyn turned back, Nora had continued on her way, disappearing among the tall cotton plants. That evening at dinner, Evelyn raised the subject with her mother. "I spoke with one of the servants today, the old woman, Nora Fields. She made an odd claim about being my nurse when I was an infant." The crystal wine glass in Victoria Beaumont's hand paused halfway to her lips. She set it down carefully. "Nora was indeed in the nursery when you were very young," she admitted, "but only as an assistant. Her memory has grown unreliable with age." "She seemed quite certain," Evelyn pressed. "Enough about the servants," her father interjected sharply. "Tell us more about your plans for the Henderson Ball. I've heard William Montgomery has been asking after you." The abrupt change of subject was unusual for her typically indulgent father, but Evelyn allowed the conversation to shift, filing away her mother's reaction for later consideration. The Henderson Ball arrived, and with it, Evelyn's formal reintroduction to county society. The grand ballroom of Henderson Hall was illuminated by hundreds of candles, casting a warm glow over the assembled elite of Alabama society. Evelyn, dressed in a gown of deep blue silk that had been tailored specifically for the occasion, found herself the center of attention. Young men lined up to request dances, while matrons appraised her with calculating eyes, measuring her potential as a future wife for their sons. William Montgomery approached her during a lull between dances. Tall and handsome, with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to privilege, he bowed formally before her. "Miss Beaumont, you've returned to us more radiant than ever. Boston clearly agreed with you." "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery," Evelyn replied, allowing a carefully measured smile. "I hear you've recently returned from Europe. How did you find it?" Their conversation flowed easily, touching on art, literature, and the differences between European and American society. William was educated and articulate, his manners impeccable. By any measure, he would make an excellent match, wealthy, well-connected, and from one of the oldest families in Alabama. Yet as they talked, Evelyn found herself distracted by a figure at the edge of the ballroom. Nora Fields, who had accompanied the Beaumont family as part of their household staff. The old woman stood against the wall, watching the proceedings with that same unsettling intensity Evelyn had noticed upon her return home. "Is something troubling you?" William asked, following her gaze. Evelyn quickly returned her attention to him. "Not at all. Simply observing the festivities." William's eyes lingered on Nora briefly before returning to Evelyn. "That woman, she's been with your family for some time, hasn't she?" "Apparently so. Though I confess I remember little of her from my childhood." A shadow passed over William's face. "Some of these old house servants carry more history than the families they serve," he remarked cryptically. Before Evelyn could inquire further, the orchestra began a new piece, and William led her back to the dance floor. Later that evening, as the Beaumonts' carriage rolled back toward their plantation, Evelyn found herself seated opposite Nora, who had been tasked with accompanying Victoria's lady's maid. The narrow confines of the carriage made it impossible to avoid the old woman's steady gaze. "You danced well tonight, Miss Evelyn," Nora commented unexpectedly. "Just like your mother at your age, the same grace." "Thank you," Evelyn replied stiffly, uncomfortable with the familiarity. "Young Mr. Montgomery seems taken with you," Nora continued, ignoring Evelyn's obvious desire to end the conversation. "His father and yours have been discussing a match for years." This information startled Evelyn. "How would you know that?" A thin smile crossed Nora's weathered face. "Walls in that house have ears, and servants have always been invisible to the masters when they talk. I know more about your family than you might think, Miss Evelyn." The woman's audacity sparked indignation in Evelyn. "You forget yourself," she said coldly. "It's not your place to comment on family matters or eavesdrop on private conversations." "My place," Nora repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "Yes, my place has always been clear to your father. Less so to you, it seems." The exchange left Evelyn unsettled, a feeling that persisted as she prepared for bed that night. There was something in the way Nora spoke, a familiarity, an expectation of acknowledgement, that disturbed her. It was as if the old woman believed they shared some connection that Evelyn couldn't or wouldn't recognize. The following morning brought news that momentarily pushed thoughts of Nora from Evelyn's mind. William Montgomery had called upon Judge Beaumont to formally request permission to court his daughter, permission that was, predictably, granted with enthusiasm. "The Montgomerys host their summer gathering next month," her father announced over breakfast. "William has specifically requested that you accompany our family. It would be an excellent opportunity for you to become better acquainted before any formal announcement." Evelyn nodded, appropriately demure in her acceptance, while inwardly calculating the advantages of such a match. The Montgomery plantation bordered Beaumont land. Together, they would create one of the largest combined estates in the county. More importantly, marriage to William would secure her position in society and provide her with the independence that came with running her own household. As the days passed, William called regularly at Beaumont Manor. Their courtship progressed with the formal precision expected of their class: chaperoned walks through the gardens, carefully supervised carriage rides, and conversations in the drawing room under the watchful eye of Victoria Beaumont. William was unfailingly courteous and attentive, his interest in Evelyn evident in every carefully chosen word and gesture. Yet through it all, Evelyn remained aware of Nora's presence on the periphery. The old woman seemed to materialize whenever William visited, finding reasons to enter rooms where they sat or linger in the garden paths they walked. Her constant observation became a source of increasing irritation for Evelyn. "That old servant watches you like a hawk," William commented during one of their walks. "Is she tasked with reporting on your behavior?" "She's merely being impertinent," Evelyn replied, loud enough for Nora, who was pruning roses nearby, to hear. "Some of the older servants struggle to understand their proper place." Nora's hands stilled for a moment on the rose stems, but she gave no other indication that she had heard Evelyn's barbed comment. That night, Evelyn was awakened by hushed voices outside her bedroom door. Curious, she slipped from her bed and moved quietly to press her ear against the wood. "Can't continue this way," her mother was saying, her voice tense. "She's noticing." "What would you have me do?" Her father's voice was equally strained. "After all this time, would you have me send her away?" "Of course not," Victoria hissed, "but her behavior toward Evelyn is becoming problematic. The girl is asking questions. Questions she would not be asking if you had simply told her the truth. Years ago," a third voice interjected, Nora's distinctive rasp. There was a sharp intake of breath from Victoria. "You forget your place, Nora." "My place?" Nora's voice hardened. "I have earned the right to speak on this matter. I kept your secret all these years, raised your child as if she were nothing to me. But I will not stand by and be treated with contempt by my own—" "Enough," Thaddeus cut in. "This discussion is over. Return to your quarters immediately." Evelyn backed away from the door as footsteps retreated down the hallway. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of what she had heard. What secret had been kept? What claim did Nora believe she had on their family? And most disturbing of all, what had Nora been about to say before her father silenced her? Sleep eluded Evelyn for the remainder of the night. By morning, her mind had constructed numerous possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Over breakfast, she studied her parents carefully, noting the shadows under her mother's eyes and the tightness around her father's mouth. Whatever had been discussed in that midnight conversation had left them both disturbed. Unable to contain her curiosity any longer, Evelyn decided to confront Nora directly. She found the old woman in the laundry house supervising the washing of the household linens. The humid air was thick with the scent of soap and steam, the younger servant scrubbing industriously at washtubs under Nora's watchful eye. "I need to speak with you," Evelyn announced. "Privately." Nora's expression revealed nothing as she nodded and followed Evelyn outside to the shade of a large oak tree. The distance from the laundry house ensured they would not be overheard. "I heard you speaking with my parents last night," Evelyn began without preamble. "You mentioned a secret they've kept from me. What were you referring to?" Nora studied her for a long moment before responding. "It's not my place to tell you that, Miss Evelyn." "You seemed eager enough to discuss it last night," Evelyn countered, "and you were about to claim some connection to me before my father stopped you. What is it you think gives you the right to involve yourself in my family's affairs?" A flash of something, pain perhaps, or anger, crossed Nora's face. "There are things about this family, about your family, that you don't understand. Things that were decided long before you were old enough to remember." "Then explain them to me," Evelyn demanded. Nora shook her head slowly. "That truth must come from your parents, not from me. But know this, there is a bond between us that cannot be severed, no matter how you might wish it so." Frustrated by the cryptic response, Evelyn felt her temper rising. "I am tired of your riddles and your presumption. You are a servant in this household, nothing more. Whatever delusions you harbor about your importance to our family are just that, delusions." The words were cruel, intended to wound, and for the first time, Evelyn saw them strike home. Nora flinched, as if physically struck, her weathered face momentarily crumpling before she mastered herself again. "You speak of what you do not know," Nora said quietly, "but one day you will understand, and you will remember this moment. Remember how you spoke to me." With that, she turned and walked back to the laundry house, her shoulders straight despite her age, leaving Evelyn alone beneath the oak tree with more questions than answers. That evening, Evelyn found herself unable to concentrate on the book she was attempting to read in the library. Her mind kept returning to Nora's words and the midnight conversation she had overheard. There was a puzzle here that she couldn't solve. pieces that didn't fit together in any configuration that made sense. The sound of her father's study door opening down the hall caught her attention. Low voices murmured briefly, then footsteps approached the library. Evelyn looked up to find William Montgomery standing in the doorway, a troubled expression on his face. "William," she said, rising from her chair, "I wasn't expecting you this evening." "Forgive the intrusion," he replied, his usual smooth confidence noticeably absent. "I needed to speak with your father on a matter of some urgency." Something in his manner, a coolness that hadn't been present before, put Evelyn on alert. "Is everything all right?" "You seem disturbed." William hesitated, then stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. "Evelyn, there are rumors circulating in the county, rumors concerning your family that have recently come to my father's attention. Given the progression of our acquaintance, he felt it necessary to investigate their veracity." A chill settled in Evelyn's stomach. "What kind of rumors?" "They concern the woman, Nora Fields." William's voice was carefully controlled. "And a potential irregularity regarding her relationship to your family." The pieces suddenly began to align in Evelyn's mind. Nora's proprietary interest in her, the midnight conversation, her parents' evident discomfort whenever the old woman was mentioned. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Evelyn asked, though she feared she already knew. William would not meet her eyes. "My father has learned from several sources that years ago your mother experienced complications following your birth. She was unable to nurse you herself. Nora Fields, who had recently given birth to a stillborn child, was brought in as your wet nurse." The revelation itself was not particularly shocking. Wet nurses were common among wealthy families, but the careful way William was approaching the subject suggested there was more. "That hardly seems cause for such concern," Evelyn said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Many women of our class employ wet nurses." "Yes," William agreed, still avoiding her gaze. "But there are additional claims. That Nora Fields is, in fact, related to your family by blood, that she is your father's half-sister, born to your grandfather and one of his slaves." The room seemed to tilt beneath Evelyn's feet. If true, that would make Nora her aunt, a relationship that crossed the rigid boundaries of race that structured their society. Worse still, it suggested a lineage that would taint her own standing, her own blood. "That's preposterous," she managed to say, "a malicious lie spread by those who envy our family's position." William finally looked at her directly. "I wanted to believe the same, but when I raised the matter with your father just now, he did not deny it. In fact, his reaction all but confirmed it." Evelyn felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. The implications were devastating, not just for her personally, but for her future, for the match with William that had seemed all but assured. "My father insists he must withdraw his blessing for our courtship," William continued, his voice gentling slightly. "He feels that under the circumstances, an alliance between our families would not be advisable." The careful phrasing didn't disguise the rejection. In an instant, the future Evelyn had envisioned, marriage to William, elevation to mistress of Montgomery Plantation, the respect and envy of county society, had evaporated. "I see," she said, fighting to maintain her composure. "And you, William, do you share your father's assessment?" A flash of genuine regret crossed his face. "I've been given no choice in the matter, Evelyn. Family obligations must take precedence over personal inclinations." He hesitated, then added more softly, "For what it's worth, I am truly sorry." With that, he bowed formally and left the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Evelyn remained standing, frozen in place, as the full weight of what had just occurred settled upon her. Then, as the shock gave way to rage, she turned and swept from the library, intent on confronting her parents. She found them in her father's study, their expressions grave. They looked up as she burst in without knocking, her composure abandoned in the face of this betrayal. "Is it true?" she demanded without preamble. "Is Nora Fields your half-sister?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Her father sank back in his chair, suddenly looking older than his years. Her mother turned away, unable to meet Evelyn's accusing stare. "Why was I never told?" Evelyn pressed, her voice shaking. "Why keep this secret, only for it to emerge now and destroy my prospects?" "We sought to protect you," her father finally said, "to shield you from complications that would only bring pain." "Protect me?" Evelyn's laugh was brittle. "William Montgomery just informed me that his father has withdrawn support for our courtship based on rumors about our family. Rumors you apparently confirmed rather than denied. How is that protection?" Victoria turned back, her face pale but composed. "We had hoped the matter would remain private, that the few who knew would keep their silence out of respect for your father's position." "And when exactly did you intend to tell me?" Evelyn demanded. "After I had married? Or perhaps never?" "You must understand the delicacy of the situation," her father began. "What I understand," Evelyn cut in, "is that you've allowed this scandal to fester until it emerged at the worst possible moment. Did it not occur to you that I deserved to know the truth about my own family?" Her mother stepped forward, reaching for her hand, but Evelyn pulled away. "Evelyn, please. We only wanted what was best for you, to give you every advantage, unmarred by complications." "Complications?" Evelyn repeated bitterly. "Is that what you call it when your husband's slave half-sister nurses your child? A complication?" The cruelty of the words hung in the air between them. Victoria flinched as if struck. "Nora is a member of this family," Thaddeus said firmly. "Regardless of the circumstances of her birth, she has been accorded respect and a place in this household that acknowledges her connection to us." "A place?" Evelyn's voice rose incredulously. "You gave her a place as a servant, as someone I could order about and dismiss at will. How is that acknowledging her as family?" Her father's expression hardened. "You don't understand the realities we've navigated, the compromises that were necessary to protect all involved. The society we live in doesn't allow for open acknowledgement of such relationships. What I understand," Evelyn said coldly, "is that you've allowed me to treat my own aunt, my own blood, with contempt, to mock her, to dismiss her as nothing more than a servant past her usefulness. And in doing so, you've now compromised my future as well." Without waiting for a response, Evelyn turned and left the study, her mind reeling with the implications of what she had learned. The household that had seemed so familiar upon her return now felt like foreign territory, filled with secrets and lies she had never suspected. She found herself walking without purpose, wandering the halls of the manor as if seeing them for the first time. Servants, people she had given little thought to beyond their utility, glanced at her curiously as she passed, perhaps noting her distress. Had they known? Had they all known the truth about Nora while she remained ignorant? Eventually, Evelyn's steps led her to the small cluster of cabins behind the main house where the domestic servants lived. She had never visited this part of the property before, had never had reason to. Now she stood before the door of the cabin she somehow knew belonged to Nora, hesitating before raising her hand to knock. The door opened to reveal Nora, still dressed despite the late hour. She showed no surprise at finding Evelyn there, as if she had been expecting this visit. "May I come in?" Evelyn asked, her voice stripped of its earlier arrogance. Nora stepped back silently, allowing Evelyn to enter the small, neat cabin. A single oil lamp cast warm light over the sparse furnishings, a narrow bed, a small table with 2 chairs, a chest for clothing. On the wall hung a simple cross, and beside it a small, faded daguerreotype in a wooden frame. Evelyn moved closer to examine the image, It showed a much younger Nora standing beside a seated white woman who was holding an infant. With a jolt, Evelyn recognized her mother as the seated woman, which meant the infant was... "That was taken when you were 6 months old," Nora said quietly from behind her. "Your mother insisted on it, though your father was against the idea, said it wasn't proper." Evelyn turned to face her, seeing the old woman, her father's half-sister, her aunt, truly for the first time. "I know the truth," she said simply. "About our connection." Nora nodded, unsurprised. "I thought you might, given the commotion in the house tonight." "Why didn't you tell me directly?" Evelyn asked. "All those times when you tried to speak to me, when you watched me, why not simply say who you were?" A sad smile touched Nora's lips. "It wasn't my place to tell you. Your parents made that clear from the beginning. They feared what such knowledge would mean for your future." "My future has already been compromised," Evelyn said bitterly. "William Montgomery's father has withdrawn his blessing for our courtship based on the rumors." "I'm sorry for that," Nora replied, and she seemed genuinely so. "Though I never thought him worthy of you." Evelyn sank into one of the chairs, suddenly exhausted. "All these years, I never knew. And you..." She looked up at Nora, truly seeing her for the first time. "You nursed me as an infant, cared for me, yet I treated you with such disdain." "You didn't know," Nora said simply, taking the chair opposite Evelyn. "You were raised to see the world in certain ways, to see people like me in certain ways." "That's no excuse," Evelyn whispered. "I should have seen you as a person, regardless of our relationship." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of years of unspoken truths hanging between them. "Tell me about when I was an infant," Evelyn finally said. "Tell me what you remember." Nora's eyes softened with memory. "You were a strong baby from the start, determined. Your mother had a difficult delivery and couldn't nurse you herself. I had just lost my own child, a little girl who came too early into this world and couldn't stay. Your father asked me to be your wet nurse." She paused, her gaze distant. "In some ways, you saved me as much as I nourished you. Giving you my milk, holding you against my heart, it helped heal the wound of my daughter's passing." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes at the simple telling. "And after, when I was older, I remained in the nursery until you were 4, when Sarah took over your care. By then you were old enough for a proper education befitting your station." The lack of bitterness in Nora's voice was perhaps the most painful thing of all. "I watched you grow from a distance after that. Saw you become a young lady, proud and accomplished." "Did you ever resent it?" Evelyn asked. "Being relegated to the background of my life after being so central to my infancy?" Nora considered the question carefully. "There were moments," she admitted. "Times when I saw you struggling or unhappy and wished I could offer comfort as I once had. Times when your mother made decisions for you that I might have made differently. But mostly, I was grateful to remain close enough to see you grow." The honesty of the answer broke something open in Evelyn's chest, a tight knot of privilege and presumption that had been at her core for as long as she could remember. "I don't know how to move forward from here," she confessed. "Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, myself, it's all been upended." "The truth has that power," Nora agreed softly. "But it also offers a chance to build something new on more solid ground." Outside the cabin, an owl called into the night. Inside, aunt and niece sat together, beginning the slow process of unraveling a lifetime of secrets and constructing a new understanding in their place. The path forward was unclear, fraught with complications neither could fully anticipate. But for the first time, they faced it together, the truth between them like a bridge across previously impassable waters. In the months that followed, Beaumont Manor witnessed subtle but significant changes. Nora Fields was quietly moved from the servants' quarters to a small room adjacent to the family wing, a change that raised eyebrows among the household staff, but went unchallenged due to Judge Beaumont's authority. Evelyn, her social prospects in the county diminished by the circulating rumors, withdrew from society gatherings, and instead devoted herself to extensive reading in her father's legal library. The relationship between Evelyn and Nora evolved gradually, cautiously. Years of established patterns could not be undone overnight. There were missteps and painful moments of realization as Evelyn confronted the depth of her previous prejudice. But there were also discoveries of shared traits, of common interests, of a family resemblance that now seemed obvious once Evelyn allowed herself to see it. By the spring of 1847, Judge Beaumont had made arrangements for Evelyn to travel north to Philadelphia, where distant cousins had agreed to introduce her to society there, a society somewhat more tolerant of complicated family histories than the rigid social structure of Alabama. Before her departure, Evelyn visited Nora's new quarters, bringing with her a small wooden box. "I want you to have this," she said, placing the box in Nora's hands. Inside lay the cameo brooch Evelyn had worn on her return from Boston, a piece of jewelry her mother had given her to mark her coming of age. "I can't accept this," Nora protested. "It's too valuable." "Its value lies in what it represents," Evelyn replied firmly. "A recognition of our connection. A promise that no matter where I go, I carry the truth of our family with me." Nora's weathered fingers closed around the cameo. "Then I accept it in that spirit." As Evelyn prepared to leave, Nora spoke again, her voice soft but clear. "Your grandfather, our father, would never acknowledge me publicly, but in private moments when no one else could see, he would call me daughter. Just once, before you go, I would like to hear you call me aunt." Evelyn turned back, seeing in Nora's eyes the weight of a lifetime of denied recognition. "Goodbye, Aunt Nora," she said, the words strange yet right on her tongue. "I will write to you from Philadelphia." The promise was kept. Letters passed between them regularly in the years that followed. Letters that Nora, who had taught herself to read despite laws prohibiting literacy among slaves, treasured and preserved. When Judge Beaumont died in 1853, his will contained a provision that granted Nora her freedom and a small annuity, a public acknowledgement, finally, of her place in the family. Evelyn never returned permanently to Alabama. She married a Philadelphia physician in 1849 and established herself in Northern society, where her complicated family history became a carefully managed secret rather than a defining scandal. But she returned to Beaumont Manor for visits, bringing her children to meet their great-aunt Nora, ensuring that the next generation would know the truth from the beginning. The story of Evelyn Beaumont and Nora Fields might have been forgotten entirely, relegated to the shadows of history, like so many similar stories from that era. But in 1964, during renovations to the old Beaumont Manor, a collection of letters was discovered concealed within a wall cavity, letters that detailed the relationship between the white plantation daughter and her black aunt. The correspondence, spanning more than 20 years, offered a rare first-hand account of a family that had navigated the treacherous waters of race, blood ties, and societal expectations in the antebellum South. Historians who studied the letters noted one particular passage written by Evelyn to Nora in 1857. "I often think of that summer when I returned from Boston, so full of pride and ignorance. How differently I might have acted had I known then what I know now. The greatest cruelty I've come to believe is not in deliberate malice, but in the casual dismissal of another's humanity. For that, though you've long forgiven me, I continue to seek atonement through how I live and what I teach my children." The Beaumont Fields letters, as they came to be known, were donated to the State Historical Society, where they remain to this day, a testament to the complex humanity that existed within the brutally rigid social structures of the antebellum South. The final letter in the collection, dated October 1861, just as the Civil War was beginning to tear the nation apart, contains what historians believe to be Evelyn's last written words to her aunt. As our country descends into the madness of war, I find myself thinking of that summer night in your cabin, when the truth finally emerged from shadows. How many other truths remain concealed beneath the veneer of our society? How many other families carry similar secrets? Perhaps the terrible conflict now upon us will ultimately break open more than just the institution of slavery. Perhaps it will also break open the silence that has allowed so many falsehoods to masquerade as natural order. Nora Fields died in 1863 at the estimated age of 93, having lived to see the Emancipation Proclamation but not the end of the war. According to local church records, Evelyn returned to Alabama for her funeral, a journey of considerable risk during wartime, and arranged for Nora to be buried not in the segregated cemetery for slaves and free blacks, but in a small plot of land adjacent to the Beaumont family cemetery. The headstone, modest but dignified, bore the inscription, "Nora Fields, beloved aunt and faithful guardian." The discovery of these records in 1962 sparked considerable controversy in the local historical community. Some dismissed the story as impossible, a fabrication or misinterpretation of the documentary evidence. Others pointed to similar cases throughout the South where blood ties crossed racial boundaries, creating family connections that defied the social order while remaining largely invisible to historical record. What is certain is that the renovation work that uncovered the letters also revealed something else, a small hidden compartment beneath the floorboards in what had once been Nora's room in the family wing. Inside was a carefully preserved baby gown of fine cotton and lace, the kind worn by infants of wealthy families for their christening. Pinned to it was a note in Nora's handwriting, "Worn by Evelyn Ann Beaumont, September 3, 1823, the day I first held her to my heart." The careful preservation of this garment, its concealment within the very structure of the house, speaks to both the depth of Nora's attachment and the necessity of keeping such sentiments hidden. What remains unclear from the historical record is whether Victoria Beaumont, Evelyn's mother, was fully aware of the blood relationship between her husband and Nora when she selected her as wet nurse for her infant daughter. Some historians suggest that the choice may have been deliberate on Judge Beaumont's part, a way of acknowledging his half-sister while maintaining the public fiction of her status as merely a house servant. In a journal entry dated 1858, Evelyn wrote, "Mother confessed to me today that she had indeed known of father's relationship to Nora from the beginning of their marriage. It was one of the conditions your grandfather imposed, she told me, that I would never speak of it openly, but that I would ensure Nora remained part of the household and was treated with what kindness could be afforded without raising suspicion." When I asked why she had chosen Nora as my wet nurse, she grew quiet for a long moment. "Because," she finally said, "I thought it might heal something broken in both of them, in Nora, who had lost her child, and in your father, who could never publicly acknowledge his sister. Perhaps it was selfish of me to use you as the instrument of that healing, but I believed then, as I believe now, that it was the right choice." The complex web of decisions, concealments, and partial acknowledgements that characterize the relationship between the Beaumonts and Nora Fields reflects the tortured contradictions of a society built on racial hierarchy yet permeated by blood connections that cross those same boundaries. Judge Thaddeus Beaumont, by all accounts, a respected jurist who enforced the laws upholding slavery, was simultaneously the half-brother of an enslaved woman whom he both protected and subjugated. Victoria Beaumont, raised in the racial orthodoxy of her time, nevertheless found ways to create space for human connection across those rigid lines. And Evelyn, initially the most conventional in her attitudes, ultimately became the one to challenge the system most directly, first through her private acknowledgement of Nora as family, and later through her decision to raise her children with knowledge of their great-aunt. The summer of 1846 marked not just Evelyn's return to Alabama after her education, but the beginning of a profound unraveling of certainty, a process that would eventually lead her to question fundamental assumptions about family, race, and her own identity. The journey from her initial casual cruelty toward Nora to their eventual reconciliation mirrors, in miniature, the larger societal reckoning that the Civil War would soon force upon the South as a whole. After the war, Beaumont Manor, like many plantation homes, fell into a period of decline. The abolition of slavery rendered its economic foundation unsustainable, and the family's fortunes diminished accordingly. By 1870, the property had been sold to cover debts, passing out of Beaumont hands for the first time in 3 generations. The new owners, a family from the north with industrial wealth, had little interest in preserving its history or maintaining connections to its past occupants. Evelyn, by then a widow with 3 adult children, made one final visit to the property in 1875. According to a letter she wrote to her eldest son, the experience was both painful and illuminating. To see other children running through those halls, other voices echoing where once our family spoke, it creates a strange displacement of self. Yet, there is something fitting in this transformation. The house that once represented the old order now shelters those who represent the new. And perhaps it is better this way, that the stones and timbers outlive the systems of thought that raised them, becoming vessels for different dreams, different possibilities. The most intriguing aspect of the Beaumont Fields story, however, comes not from the 19th century, but from a series of interviews conducted in 1966 with elderly residents of the county who claim to have heard stories passed down about the family. One interviewee, a woman named Dorothy Clemens, then 87 years old, recounted a tale told by her grandmother. "My grandma used to say that when they was tearing down parts of the old Beaumont place for renovation back in 1920 or thereabouts, they found something strange in the wall of what used to be the nursery, a little cloth doll, real old-fashioned, with 2 faces stitched onto it, one side white, one side black. And pinned to it was a little piece of paper with some writing nobody could make out. It was so faded. The foreman took it home meaning to show somebody from the Historical Society, but that night his house caught fire and burned clean to the ground. Nothing left but ashes. Some folks said it was just an old child's toy, but my grandma, she always said it was something Ms. Nora Fields had made, a way of telling a truth nobody was allowed to speak." Like many such stories that blend documented history with oral tradition, the tale of the 2-faced doll cannot be verified. No mention of such an object appears in any official records of renovations to the property. Yet the story persisted in local memory, a symbolic representation, perhaps, of the dual identities and hidden truths that characterized the Beaumont family. In 1959, a historian researching connections between prominent Southern families discovered court records from 1835, 11 years before Evelyn's return from Boston, in which Judge Beaumont had successfully petitioned to prevent the sale of one female slave, Nora, and her infant daughter when his father's estate was being settled. The petition cited special circumstances and moral obligation as justification for keeping these particular slaves separate from the general estate. The infant daughter referenced in the document is presumed to be the child Nora later lost, the stillborn girl she mentioned to Evelyn during their conversation in the cabin. The court's decision to grant Judge Beaumont's petition was unusual for its time, and speaks to both his influence in local legal circles and the unspoken recognition of Nora's blood relationship to the family. This document, when considered alongside the later discovery of the Beaumont Fields letters, provides a more complete picture of the judge's complicated position, enforcing the very legal system that enslaved his half-sister, while simultaneously working within that system to offer her what limited protection he could. A diary kept by a neighboring plantation owner's wife, discovered in 1964 among family papers, contains a brief but telling entry from September 1823. Called upon Victoria Beaumont to pay respects after the birth of her daughter. Found her in good spirits, though still weak. The infant is being nursed by a mulatto woman named Nora, who tends to the child with unusual devotion. There are whispers among the servants about this arrangement, but Judge B silences such talk with a severity that gives one pause. One cannot help but wonder what truths lie beneath such vehement denial. This contemporary observation, made by someone outside the family but close enough to witness their dynamics, lends credibility to the relationships described in the later correspondence between Evelyn and Nora. It suggests that even at the time of Evelyn's birth, there were suspicions about Nora's connection to the Beaumont family, suspicions carefully managed through Judge Beaumont's authority and the willingness of white society to maintain comfortable fictions rather than confront uncomfortable truths. The story might have remained of interest only to academic historians had it not been for a discovery made in 1968 during the cataloguing of materials at the Philadelphia Historical Society. Among the papers of Dr. James Winthrop, Evelyn's husband, researchers found a small leather-bound journal kept by Evelyn between 1850 and 1855. The journal, written in a candid style clearly not intended for public consumption, contained reflections on her life in Philadelphia and her ongoing correspondence with Nora. One entry, dated March 1852, reads, "Received a letter from Aunt Nora today, bringing news from Alabama that simultaneously feels distant and immediate. She writes of changes to the house, of father's declining health, of the garden she tends now that mother has granted her more authority over household matters. Between her lines, I read a different story, of a woman finally claiming small measures of the dignity that should have been her birthright. She ends her letter with words that haunt me. In dreams, I sometimes forget the world as it is and remember us as we might have been. Sisters raised together, sharing secrets and sorrows without the weight of all that divides us. I wept upon reading this, for in her simple words lies the indictment of an entire society, my society, the world that shaped me and that I continue to inhabit, however uneasily." The journal revealed that Evelyn's relationship with Nora had profoundly altered her worldview, leading her to quietly support abolitionist causes in Philadelphia while maintaining the social facade necessary to protect her position and family. It also suggested that her decision to remain in the North after marriage was influenced not just by social opportunity, but by a growing moral discomfort with Southern society's foundational premises. Perhaps most significantly, the journal confirmed that Evelyn had indeed told her children about Nora, introducing her not as a former slave, but as your grandfather's sister, your great-aunt, a woman of remarkable strength and dignity. This deliberate reframing, this insistence on recognizing familial bonds across the racial boundaries that Southern society had deemed absolute, represented a quiet but profound rejection of the ideology that had shaped Evelyn's early years. The final pages of Evelyn's journal, written after Nora's death in 1863, contain a passage that historians have cited as particularly revealing. "With Aunt Nora's passing, a chapter of our family history closes, a chapter written in whispers and shadows, in glances and silences, in truths acknowledged only in the most private moments. But I am determined that what follows will be different. My children will know her name, her story, her place in our family. They will know that their blood is not the pure stream of European ancestry that society prizes, but a river with many tributaries, some deliberately erased from the map. And perhaps in this knowing, they will find their way to a more honest relationship with both past and future. This determination to acknowledge rather than erase the complex racial history of her family set Evelyn apart from many of her contemporaries, who often went to extraordinary lengths to conceal or deny such connections. Her choice was not without cost. Certain sectors of Philadelphia society remained closed to her, and her husband's medical practice reportedly lost patients when rumors about Nora's relationship to the family occasionally surfaced. Yet according to letters exchanged between Evelyn and her eldest son in the 1880s, she never regretted her decision to honor the truth of her family's history. The discoveries at Beaumont Manor in 1964 coincided with a period of intense civil rights activism in Alabama and throughout the South. For many, the story of Evelyn Beaumont and Nora Fields served as a powerful reminder of the artificial nature of racial categories that had been presented as immutable, a historical example of how blood ties crossed the very boundaries that society insisted were absolute. The revelation that prominent white families like the Beaumonts had black relatives was hardly surprising to the black community, who had preserved such knowledge through oral history even when written records were destroyed or concealed. But the documentation provided by the Beaumont Fields letters offered irrefutable evidence that complicated the historical narrative many white Alabamians had been raised to believe. In 1965, when the letters were first publicly exhibited at the State Historical Society, visitors' reactions ranged from denial to fascination to profound discomfort. One elderly woman was overheard remarking, "My grandmother always said the old families had secrets darker than anyone would speak of." Seems she was right all along. A young civil rights activist, interviewed by a local newspaper, observed, "These letters just prove what we've always known, that the lines they drew between black and white were lines in sand, not in stone." The broader significance of the Beaumont Fields story lies in what it reveals about the nature of racial identity in antebellum America, not as the fixed biological reality it was claimed to be, but as a social construct maintained through silence, denial, and carefully managed public performances. The letters between Evelyn and Nora document not just their personal reconciliation, but a fundamental questioning of the categories that defined their society. A historian writing in 1966 noted, "What makes the Beaumont Fields correspondence so valuable is not just its rarity as documentation of cross-racial family ties, but the evolution it reveals in Evelyn Beaumont's thinking. We see her move from unquestioning acceptance of racial hierarchy to recognition of its fundamental dishonesty, a journey catalyzed not by abstract principle, but by personal connection. In her growing relationship with Nora Fields, we glimpse the human reality beneath the rigid social structures of the period, the bonds of blood and affection that persisted despite all efforts to deny them. The physical structure of Beaumont Manor itself became a metaphor for this hidden history. The concealed compartments, the letters sealed within walls, the carefully preserved baby gown, all spoke to truths too dangerous to display openly, yet too important to discard. The architecture of secrecy within the house mirrored the architecture of silence within Southern society as a whole, where knowledge of interracial family connections often existed as an open secret, simultaneously known and denied. What remains most poignant about the story, however, is its intimate human dimension. Beyond its historical significance, it is fundamentally the story of two women navigating a relationship defined by profound social contradiction. Nora, who nursed and loved a child she could not publicly claim as kin, and Evelyn, who had to unlearn a lifetime of conditioned responses to recognize the aunt who had always seen her clearly. In a letter written to Nora in 1851, Evelyn reflected on the summer of her return to Alabama. "I think often of how blind I was then, how cruel in my blindness. I looked at you and saw only what I'd been taught to see. Now I understand that the greatest trick of our society has been to make us unable to recognize our own kin, to divide us not just from those deemed other, but from the truth of our own connections. In finding you as my aunt, I have also found a more honest version of myself." The last known photograph of Evelyn Beaumont Winthrop, taken in Philadelphia around 1890, shows an elderly woman seated in a garden, surrounded by adult children and grandchildren. On her lapel is pinned a cameo brooch that family records confirm was the same one she had given to Nora decades earlier, returned to her after her aunt's death, and worn thereafter as a quiet tribute to a connection that had transformed her understanding of both family and self. Nora Fields left no direct descendants, her only child having been stillborn. Yet her influence continued through Evelyn's children and grandchildren, who grew up knowing the story of their great-aunt and the complex history she represented. According to family papers, Evelyn's eldest granddaughter, born in 1874, was given the middle name Nora, a public acknowledgement of the relationship that had once been hidden behind walls of silence. Today, Beaumont Manor no longer stands. The structure was destroyed by fire in 1973, leaving only the foundation and chimney stacks as testament to what once was. The land has since been developed for commercial use, with no marker to indicate the human dramas that unfolded there. The Beaumont family cemetery was relocated, the graves moved to a municipal cemetery in the nearby town. Nora's grave, situated just outside the family plot, was moved along with the others, the physical separation maintained even in this final transition. Yet the story of Evelyn Beaumont and Nora Fields endures, preserved in letters, journals, and the fragmentary evidence of lives that defied categorization. Their shared history reminds us that beneath the surface of what we think we know about the past, beneath the simplified narratives of separation and difference, lie complex webs of connection, blood ties that cross the very boundaries meant to keep them distinct. In her final letter to her son, written shortly before her death in 1892, Evelyn reflected on what she had learned through her relationship with Nora. "The truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. It remains with you, altering how you perceive everything that follows. I look back on the young woman I was, so certain of her place in the world, so confident in her understanding of its order, and I hardly recognize her. Nora gave me more than sustenance as an infant. In the end, she gave me the gift of uncertainty, the capacity to question what I had been taught was beyond question. This has been both burden and liberation, but I would not trade it for the false comfort of unexamined conviction." Perhaps this is the most enduring legacy of the Beaumont Fields story, this recognition that certainty, particularly about categories of human identity, may be the most dangerous illusion of all. In the evolving relationship between a plantation daughter and the aunt she was taught to see as a servant, we glimpse the possibility of recognition across boundaries designed to prevent precisely such connection. A reminder that the rigid structures of society, however immutable they may appear, are ultimately vulnerable to the simple, revolutionary power of human acknowledgement.